introduce Jessica. I had the biggest crush on Sam Fields when I first met her. She came to Summer Arts at Fresno State a very long time ago, and I sort of watched her from afar, like, she's so smart and so talented and such a badass, and her students love her, and I just was like, I have to be your friend, please. And so once a year, like every summer for several summers, I would come up and sort of court her and be like, can we be friends outside of Summer Arts? And finally, we actually did get together outside of Summer Arts, and all my dreams came true. And the amazing, talented, smart as can be, badass, driven, dedicated, talented, my friend, Sam Fields.
I'm gonna cry now. Hi everybody, as you can tell from the slideshow, I never take my coat off, so I was like, I'm just gonna leave it on. Those slides were amazing, right? Did you guys like seeing yourselves? You didn't even see Todd Sharp, right? He just sneakily took all your pictures. So first I want to ask, how many science fiction fans do we have in the audience today? Yeah, okay, a little louder, science fiction. That's right, me too. I'm driving the silver Subaru with the Starfleet Academy license plate. If you see that, that's me. Anybody out here read Octavia Butler's work? Yes! Thank you. Me too. Okay, so I'm going to tell you how I know these lights blind me. I do feel like Captain Picard in that one episode where he's like, there are 4 lights. Really bright. I know Jessica Wimbley because we both showed the same gallery in Los Angeles, Western Project. And so I actually saw her work before I ever met her in person. So I saw her show, I Am Katrina, and the show blew me away. In it, she depicts herself as Katrina, who's kind of a mythical figure in Louisiana, who's actually based on a real historical person. But me, the science fiction buff, I looked at these powerful images, and all I could see was Afro-futuristic space princess, earth goddess Lilith from Lilith's Brood, Octavia Butler's book. And I actually confessed this to Jessica a couple nights ago after a glass of wine or two. And she loved it, thank God. And I said, you know, basically, in these images, she depicts herself as Katrina, and she's wearing this sarong, and it's in all this foliage, and the universe is like a crown or a halo on her head. And they're just really, really incredible images. And I think that this image I have of Jessica in my mind every single time I read Octavia Butler book is appropriate because I also know that Octavia Butler has been a huge, huge influence on Jessica's work as well. So I hope that you can join me in welcoming my dear friend and fellow science fiction maniac, Jessica Wimbley, to the stage.
Hello. Oh, wow. Okay, that's pretty strong. I'm so happy to hear that there's so many fellow dorks in the audience who love science fiction. I consider myself a lipstick dork, so I'm glad that some of you are going to really understand my references because it's kind of pulling from different sources in science fiction and also from my personal life. I'm going to start off because this summer arts program, we are talking about autobiography during this session. Talking a little bit about where I come from and starting with these fabulous, beautiful people who brought me into this world, which are my parents. This is them in the 60s, and they're high school sweethearts. Let's see here. But really, when I think of my parents, this image is a strong image that comes to play. The big butterfly collar, the awesome turtleneck, the huge beard, the fro, the sleekness of my mom's hair. They always conjured an image for me of Princess Leia and Shaq. don't really think they fully realize that I might kind of see them this way. But I enjoy thinking of them in this way. And it speaks to what type of popular cultural references that were an important part of my life that I was consuming as I was growing up. And of course, blaxploitation being some iconography from there, as well as Star Wars.
Yeah.
Right on. My parents owned an advertising agency, and that was something that was a really big influence in my life growing up. They actually owned, during the 90s, the 8th largest Black-owned advertising agency in the country. And they produced a lot of commercials, both for print, radio, and TV, for a variety of companies, including General Motors, Mazda, Kellogg's, BP. They worked with a lot of major corporations. And part of what they were tasked with doing was targeting to a Black market. And a Black market, and in general, a diversity market. And thinking of that during the 90s, that was something that was a field that was very important, because during the 90s there was real work towards multiculturalism and actually seeing economic value in diversity. And so looking at different groups and now trying to target media and creating media and representations for them were very important. They had their ads in magazines and publications such as Jet magazine. Are you guys familiar with Jet?
Yeah.
Okay, right on. As well as Ebony. And of course, with these major publications that geared and targeted the Black community, it really set up a hierarchy of telling the market what they felt was important, trying to represent how we communicate with the Black population, whether it be goods, values, ideas of beauty. And Janet? I come from a pretty big family. I think it was intended to have a little fro. I cut off my hair when I was young, which was a very, that was an affront to all types of Black respectability, and which at the time I didn't realize, but my sister got me a little red Wimbley breaker and told me I looked like Michael Jackson, and that made me happy. So little Black girls that I saw in popular culture and sometimes would be compared to or could identify with. Of course, Rudy from The Cosby Show, Tootie from Facts of Life. I was a boarding school kid. Penny from Good Times. Well, not exactly like Penny from Good Times, but you know, I just love young Janet, and everybody loved Penny. And of course, being kind of nerdy, I really into Urkel, and not that I loved him in the 90s, but I just love Black nerdiness and dorkiness. So one of the things that I find so phenomenal about these different publications and looking at media and using them as a source is that there is a real connection between my parents creating images for them and it serving as a resource for me to go into later and use for different collage elements. But also it really hit home because my family was literally inside the content. As you can see here, when my father passed away, he was included in Jet Magazine's Dads and Their Kids issues when he passed. Growing up, a lot of images that I felt that I saw of women that looked like myself came from this book called Africa Adorned, in which I saw Black women who had dope jewelry, which I really liked, had nice skin, and nudity was a non-sexualized issue, rather just a natural state of being. And I really was fascinated by the image of women carrying items on their head. That's amazing. They have to have a lot of strength to do that. And also looking at how globalism impacts kind of the aesthetics of different regions. Here is an image in which Dutch actual colonial traditions are merged with Gambian fabric and fashion, so you get this new hybrid of fashion that's happening within this region. And juxtaposition to that, you still have very much a connection to the indigenous aesthetic that has evolved, including weave from China in the hairstyles. So this idea of brown women carrying things on their head was something that was interesting to me because I think it represented the fact that you had a lot of women of color around the world who were working, who were okay with their bodies, who weren't sexualized, but humanized as mothers, as sisters, as women. And as a result, it was important to me to keep images of representation of women in this way. This is an image actually that was going from a photography project that had a king and his wives documented in the 70s that was locked far away within an academic collection within Claremont Graduate University, which was going to be thrown away. And it was my mission to save these women's, the women, the wives, and the queens of this particular community. When I was 19, I had the opportunity to go to Accra, and this is where I had the chance to take one of my first photographs. One of the things that I found so fascinating about capturing this image is that it didn't look like something that came from the late 90s, but rather it reminded me of Ruby Bridges when she was a little girl integrating elementary schools. Something that I could relate with, often being the only little black girl in that space. I started to think about how we learn and come up with combining images of self or seeing self and trying to make these types of equations out of it. What do you get when you have Urkel divided by 2 to the third? What's cotton plus Mr. T squared? What you talking about, Willis divided by Kool-Aid? And Pam Grier to the Urkel 7th power. For my thesis show for graduate school, what I ended up doing was creating this large installation which was solving for a problem. The problem being, how do we come up with authentic representation in popular culture? I use things like grids, lined paper, and chalkboard to show the instructional nature in which we learn how to see ourselves and consume these images, and frankly, present an equation that can't be solved. This is mixed media with photography, video, and wallpaper. And the photos include images of lawn jockeys, which are old sculptures, particularly found in the South or the Midwest, that had these grotesque kind of representations of a black figure who is either holding a ring or a lantern, and often used as a lucky talisman or a sense of welcome in front of people's homes. I was kind of fascinated by the idea that you would want to stick this black dude outside of your home, and thought about what if you had a real life black person in front of your home? And how would these things translate if you were to somehow embody the stereotype? Would it seem stupid? Would people get it? And what happens when the jockey has a mind of his or her own and enters into different spaces, such as bodegas in Echo Park. This idea makes me think a lot about home, and pulling images of home off the internet gives it this distorted image of what my house used to look like. There's this idea of wanting to go back home and the yellow brick road in relationship to the diaspora, which begs the question, how did we get out of Kansas and how do we get back? I also was influenced by The Wiz in conjunction with the Wizard of Oz, because The Wiz is supposed to be the black version of the Wizard of Oz. And something that's interesting about The Wiz, when you think about kind of the differences and look at marketing and advertising, the 90s is the time where they created the phrase, the urban market. Have you guys heard of this before? Yeah. Who's the urban market? Black people. We are black people, people of color. So this has something to do to speak to language and trying to define not just people, but spaces and ideas. And the conflict in how people are trying to not only define a market, but define a new cultural element and how people operate. So something in the 90s in which it was trying to diversify how we looked at people in location has now become this played out stereotype in contemporary times that is a coded word for something altogether. And of course, the little afro. Which makes me think about the whole notion of graffiti and urban, and that idea being some type of aesthetic of what the African American experience is supposed to be, how we make art. And I lived in suburbia. And as a result, I thought about things that impacted inward values within my household, such as the GM, which was a huge car company that my parents, again, had as a client, kind of these stereotypical kind of African-American respectability values of a working upper middle class professional. The idea of my father looking down upon us. The idea of upward mobility of the black family. And God and religion Christianity being an important part of that. As well as demarcations of status being a part of the American dream and the American fantasy. But within this particular series, in which I call Suburban, I play with creating alternate narratives within the surface of the brick. One that's digital, mediated, collaged, and having a lot of different dialogues within the continual space, at times that could be circular and confusing. With the yellow brick road, not being quite sure what it's leading us to, but it does look like colonialism is about to run into it, and capitalism is about to make stuff blow up. This is where I put the lawn jockey back in, standing on some of the history of images, of representation. You have a little guy that's kind of hard to see who's mowing the lawn of the house, but you also have teachers fighting for a more equitable situation. This is work by Carl Benjamin, who's known for working within the hard edge tradition in Southern California that does these geometric shapes. And the thing that I found amazing about this work, while it's a part of this hard-edged abstraction, which is using kind of this grid type of pattern, it reminded me a lot of G's Ben quilt, which was made over 100 years before the white man discovered geometric hard-edged abstraction. It also made me think about the embedded coding within quilting and with geometry, within kind of these geometric shapes. regarding some of the Underground Railroad quilts with its codes woven into the quilting. But it also reminded me of artists like Robert Swain, who does these expansive, amazing, transformative, color-filled paintings that are a lot like Color Aid. I got really happy when I went to this show and the guard was like, "Miss, you need to calm down." This idea of color from both a formal concept, but also thinking about how it functions within photography. This is an image of a Shirley card. This is, do you guys know what a Shirley card is? So in the 70s, they had this image of this woman, which they called the Shirley card, and that's what you're supposed to set your, and it determined how you set the settings on your camera to take pictures of skin tone. And that she is the feature in skin tone in which is normalized that you set your camera to. That's why there's normal under there. Yeah, I know, it's wrong. And so you have people making responses to this, that there's no way that you can really get the color that you would need or the settings that you would need for different skin tones. In fact, the idea that it's normalized through the Shirley card of this blue-eyed woman with light skin being the norm leaves out a huge population with a wide variety of skin tones who can be photographed, making the work of capturing people of color on film tricky. This is work by artist Byron Kim, who works in painting, and as you can see, we still have some more formalized color painting, but now we're looking at more tonal values and variation in relation to skin tone. This is work by an artist by the name of Angelica Das. And what she does is actually uses the Pantone color classification to create, in an attempt to try to create portraits of people by taking pictures and using 11 by 11 pixels from the sitters to get their skin tone that then is mixed and then alphanumerically coded to start naming all the different skin tones and colors that are out there. And you have people volunteering in order to get the breadth of what the different colors and tones people can come in. Going back to this idea of pixelation, you have Charles Gaines, who has these deconstructed photographs and images by pixelating or breaking down through gridding of the image. And you have Turavat Taus-Passand. I hope I pronounced her name right. With this piece, The Censored Garden, that she did in 2008. This is egg tempera on linen. And she's playing with, again, this idea of pixelation, but now in terms of editing and censorship. So combining all these different ideas of how pixels can function, or I already kind of said, we're already relating these squares to pixels because we're working in a digital age. And so making reference to pixels as a form of code that's embedded is something that is represented throughout my work. Artist by the name of Ruud van Empel does an amazing job of doing Photoshop and creating these portraits of children, of Black people who actually aren't real. He painstakingly goes through and composes each element through Photoshop after having taken portraits of children that dramatically changes the image and creates a new type of fantasy world. His aesthetic and photography reminded me of Kerry James Marshall's paintings, who is an artist who lives and works in Chicago, Illinois. And I was particularly fascinated by the Lost Boys series that he did in the early 90s and how well he rendered the idea of blackness and black skin of his figures. And so when I started making my own work incorporating digital photography, collaging, drawing, on top of the surfaces, I was thinking about how you can bridge both photography, painting, and drawing and create a new type of narrative and a new type of visual language within the work. And this piece, called Octavia's History 1, makes reference to our homegirl, Octavia Butler. And one of the things that I found about working with the black female figure and working with this idea of time, spaces, and history is this notion that, well, black women, well, life comes from us. So why wouldn't we be there at the beginning of time? And so within this piece, Big Bang, you see actually in the back some gels from DNA, for protein samples from DNA, as well as galactic events that are happening and pixelation that's taken forth. As we go back to Kerry James Marshall and look at his paintings, one of the things that he said that was important was that he wanted to create a narrative history painting of the mundane. Because when you're not represented, even the smallest things become increasingly significant. And then there's Octavia Butler, the woman I love. And I really, really was inspired by her because she really believed that if they're not including you, you write it and include yourself. That's right. So, many of her books I have read and I love, and I thought a lot about Wild Seed and this idea of a black woman who can be a shapeshifter, who can give life, who could change. And I would go to talks. I was lucky enough to see Octavia Butler actually cut class. I went to go see Octavia Butler, and she told me to keep going. And that was very profound for me because, like, if Octavia told me to do it, I have to do it. I'm also inspired by Audre Lorde, and I think this quote is quite significant. If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. I don't want to be eaten alive. I want to have agency. Audre Lorde came up with the term biomythography from her book, Zammy, A New Spelling of My Name. And it's a combination of biography, myth, and history. And Ted Warburton, who is actually a performance studies guy out of Santa Cruz, went on to further define biomythography as weaving together of myth, history, and biography in epic narrative form, a style of composition that represents all the ways in which we perceive the world. Thinking of biomythography in putting together compositions in the ways in which we perceive the world led me to believe that it makes sense to work in an interdisciplinary manner. I also thought about the one-drop rule and how it defines a person within our country, within the US. It's all-inclusive, uniquely American. And I've also been thinking about intersectionality, which is a feminist term defined by Kimberly Crenshaw. It's a methodology of studying the relationships among multiple dimensions and modalities of social relationships and subject formations. So this has led me to a number of ideas and questions. For one, when I look at my own history, I think of my mother who passes on many of the stories and has actually written stories of our own experience in family history. In particular, my mom's coming from a perspective of being a post-World War II generation baby from the union between a German woman in Germany and an African-American soldier from the US. She was a contributor to this book called Kinder der Befreiung, and my mother is a very important part in terms of how I see myself and how the story of our family is continued and is a great source of wisdom, both in a verbal and textual sense. I also thought about genetics. If we talk about one drop of blood, we have the technology to see what's in that one drop of blood. And so I went to National Geographic and did a blood test there to figure out exactly what I was. Was it in line with what my mother said? What was the path, what was our path out of Africa? And you see that movement that pretty much looks like a big question mark? That was our ancestors' path out of Africa. I also did 23andMe. And the funny thing about 23andMe is that they have like a conservative, a standard, and like an estimated makeup of what you are. So this is, or the speculative. So this is my speculative makeup. And I love that there's 1.2 unassigned. I think of that as artist. Here's the conservative, in which I have now become European. And 65% unassigned, so I think I'm more artist in this one. And here's the standard, which reflects me being 2.2% artist and more sub-Saharan African. And with that, as you can see, even from doing genetic tests, depending on the measures that they're using, identity can be very shifty. And so I started thinking about that. I'm continuing about thinking about things on kind of this microscopic genetic level, and of course thinking about melanin. And this image that you see here, especially the one, what is this, on the left. Got issues there. The one on the left is something that I ghost throughout many of my images because it's a melanin double, a microscopic image, and it's abstracted at this level of blown up, and I like it being abstracted, and I like it being an ongoing presence throughout the work. I also think of stem cells because that's like some magical woman stuff, right? Like, you can like create all types of crazy stuff biologically. I don't even understand. It's pretty cool. Makes it even shape-shifting. And of course, I think about what this means on a macro scale in relationship to the world, to the universe, and how in history we've looked at the stars for different pathways, for movement, for navigation throughout the world. I go back to the figure, and I think about the different ways in which the Black female body has been used, and saw this dress by Peggy Nolan, and I'm like, why is my body on this white woman? Why did they make a dress out of this, and why does it have a Gene Simmons head and an Oprah head? WTF. Then you have Joe Scallon. Have you guys heard of him? Ooh, okay. He is a white artist who decided that he's going to be this Black woman named Donnell Walford with basically my qualifications as a performance, and who actually gets shows over real Black women who exist in reality, who makes like this really kind of abstract expressionist work that is typically something that is valued within Western culture, and I found it offensive and frustrating, considering that I'm real and I'm here. You know? Then there's Nate Hill, who says, I wear white women for status and power. And I'm like, brother, you're killing me. So the white woman has essentially become his chain. And he wears her. And I'm thinking about, why are these people wanting to wear other women? It's so strange and problematic. And then I think about the times that we're going through, historically and contemporary times. Lynching postcards, which used to be the only documentation that we had of the atrocities that many African American men, women, and children experienced during our history. And then how we're seeing police brutality in contemporary times, in which we can, at any time, almost pull up a compilation of the week. It used to be back in the 90s, Rodney King was like the first time we saw these things in video. And now we can see them all the time. And so I was thinking about, at the time, as I start going into some work, how we're viewing some of these images. The greenality of it, it not being too clear, especially when you start looking at film that's being taken from security cameras, what type of cell phones and at what time period. And thinking about America in the midst of ecological problems, legal problems, financial problems, and thinking about these iconic images of women that is supposed to represent the best of what we have to offer. I also look at Native American ledger drawings because they're the greatest things ever. But also, they give you indication early on of what immigration looked like from their perspective. And I like the stacking of the horses on top of each other. And of course, these are images of some slave shacks from a plantation, and thinking about our history of slavery within America. And so I took a trip down south to Cane River, Louisiana, in which I went and visited the yucca plantation and learned the story of Marie Theresa Coin and her descendants. And apparently, she was a beautiful black slave who the French master fell in love with her, freed her, married her. They had children, and the children passed on the plantation to the children, making it the largest owned Creole plantation in Louisiana. And so when I began the I Am Katrina series, I was using some of the romantic beauty of the South, but also thinking of the history of the region within the work, using it as a place to shift and play with how we experience time. Within this particular piece, Flag, I was actually in front of a old Creole dance hall that had a brown bag rule that allowed you to get in, meaning if you're darker than a paper bag, you could not get in. And here I am, standing on the outside. Within this image, in terms of putting it together, the composition, it was important to me to throw in some elements talking about status, consumption, class, police brutality, immigration, suburbs, the border. And there's a little tiny image that you see on the right, which is Sputnik. And it goes back to something that Obama said, where he said to us, we are in our own Sputnik moment. Continuing with this series, I think of the idea of graffiti as part of the picture plane, both coming in and out of the background, as well as thinking of the figure acting as being both an object of subjectivity and objectivity, both seeing, witnessing, participating in the events that are happening within and around her world. I also link it to some religious tropes, the ideas of almost the Garden of Eden, but still this idea of diaspora and looking for home. You have the yellow brick road that's still in there. And this piece is called Midnight in the Garden of. Just to give you an idea of scale. This piece is called Their Ears Were Listening to God, because there's like a burning bush there. I like the idea of women doing work of magic. So here we are in Cane River, looking at some of the iconic images and architecture that are in that space. Still thinking about the idea of the yellow brick road and continuing to incorporate that, as well as astrology. This image has the Big Dipper in it, as that was something that was used as a guide to go up north. And this is a full image of the piece. It's called Town and Country. And on the right side, you have the figure being able to see different events that are happening both in the past and contemporary in different places in the world involving protest and change. And again, the idea of the Black woman also being a creator, being an important idea and thread throughout the work. Sputnik. So, as Sam said, I'm a Trekkie. This is from Star Trek: The Next Generation. And it's the episode Skin of Evil, where like the evil black thing came out and killed Tasha Yar. I don't know if you guys remember that episode. But it was this really kind of interesting amorphous black figure in space who was just evil. And I thought about, well, what if you just had interesting black figures that were operating in this strange space, who were doing different things, who talked to each other, who weren't mean, who were just, chilling. And some things about them actually reminded me of Clay's Ark, the black sleek figures that were almost cat-like, and the astronauts. And thinking about ideas of intersectionality and multiple selves. That was Rita. I thought about ways that you could represent different fictions and histories and fold them into these amazing epic spaces, combining not only ideas in the picture plane, but also in relation to art history. So in some areas here, you've got some Frida, you've got some Georgia O'Keeffe vaginal action that's happening kind of here, which I was really stoked about. But a show that I was invited to be in at Chafee Contemporary Museum of Art. I mean, it was making a statement about what it means to be a Black woman making art within a contemporary art world today. Not only making art, but working within that world. And I was asked to be in this feminist show, and I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it. Because I do consider myself more of a womanist than a feminist, because I'm interested in justice. And I didn't feel that I could be in the show without making a statement about what was happening within the art world. And while there's a statement about women not being present or women not being around, all the administrators, a majority of the curators, a majority of the educators actually happen to be white women. And so I made these labels asking, is the white box posturing not only talking about white women, but also talking about the gallery and museum space in which they're operating in? And was it trying to gear towards the masculine? Or has the white box become the white womb, a space of white female femininity? This is the chemical equation for melanin. And I am the brown elephant in the room. So I started looking at stereographs, which were a form of photography, entertainment, virtual travel that were made between the 1840s and 1920s. During this time, they were thought to be these representations of truth. You looked at them through these viewfinders and it created this like 3D effect. So this was like some high-tech stuff. People were like going nuts. We're like, whoa, I'm there, you know, in the 1800s and whatnot. But they're interesting because, again, they provided not only entertainment, but were giving and distributing images of people and how they live lives in the way that people had never seen before, how people worked in factories, parts of our ecology and our landscape. But they also instructed us of how to look at people. Actually, within this piece, it might be hard to see, but they call this piece primitive artists. And I'm like, oh, these ladies need to be with me. You also had just like really weird stuff where I don't understand a free lunch. It's like really, but I find it amazing that these things exist. Instructions on how to be a citizen, like how to tie your shoe, really? I mean, that's, I don't know what to say to that. What classrooms look like. And also portraiture of people and native populations. And so I liked playing with the different images that I found and thinking about different ancestors that I didn't have images of and who I didn't know, and finding placeholders for them through these cabinet cards and creating new narratives within them. I started looking at the oval, not only in the how Victorian photography and portraiture was often represented within this shape, but also thinking of life in general, something that was cellular, something that often was looked under a microscope was also within this shape. And creating narratives within this space. Yay, and you see the melanin flowing through still. And then you have an image of my great-great-grandmother. Hee. My mom and my uncle and my aunt dressed up in old tiny clothes, which I'm like, oh, this is perfect. This is really messing with kind of time and space and representation here. And combining them to create different portraitures with my own portrait. This particular cabinet card was called Belle, and she's an image that I've used as a constant figure throughout this particular series, the Belle series, in which I combine portraits, self-portraiture, and family portraiture. show that I was in at Ripon College. There she is again, so you can see how I'm using her. Another relative. Woo. This is a continuation of the Bell series. Installation view at Western Project. And these are about 36.5 by 54 inches and printed on canvas. This is an image of family members in Germany. And so I didn't only just take images from the stereographs and from old family photos and portraits that I did, but clearly there were space images, there was melanin in there. But I also worked with collage, pulling elements from magazines and what have you. And this actually happens to be an issue of Ebony in which it had the beauty queens from all the black colleges. These are actually cabinet cards from a collection called the Mirror of Race, which is a collection that deals with early 19th century photographic images of people of color. And I was inspired looking at these images, how people were fashioning their own identity, and sometimes it being the first time that they had the option to do so for themselves. And I was also fascinated by the different stories these images told. I wasn't sure if this was the mother or the nanny or whose hair that was. It becomes ambiguous. And so I started collecting my own hair and cabinet cards and combining these different images. Conflating time by combining 18th century with the 70s and 80s, and composing different compositions with these cards, like a tree or a cell growing. Working into the surfaces using graphite, etching out with X-Acto. And creating multiple people and multiple images. These guys are tiny. I play with how these guys can be installed, how they can be paired. And I pulled the elements that I work from and composed them into a case using museum installation and exhibition methods to display it. So now we're going back to our jet. We're looking at beauties of the week. Aren't these bikinis great? And the hair, that hairstyle is really something. And how instructive these beauties of the week were in telling us what we should and should not look like, and what was aspirational, and what was ideal. So here I am in a residency at the University of Laverne, and I've been working on this series with the Jet Beauties of the Week, and this series is called Bell Jet. And with this series, not only am I doing the digital collage, but I'm also drawing into and working into these pieces with pastel, graphite, charcoal, fine charcoal, graphite, and powdered pigment, upping the ante on the saturation of the work. Here's the work, a few pieces installed at the Skin Show that was at the Barnsdale in Los Angeles. And here's some details where you can see some more of how the work was worked in by hand. And I like doing cheeky things in the compositions. Um, in showing you detail in terms of how the images are tweaked again, playing with color, looking at those edges and color relationships, pushing the neutral tones and getting more saturated color. I know some of my students are hearing me on this. I've been on you. And here are the pieces installed at University of Laverne. And that is it. Thank you.
Very nice, Jessica. So it's going to be good.
Thank you.
Is your art still hanging at the University of Laverne?
No, unfortunately not, but I do have a show coming up in September.
Where?
And, gosh, sorry, I'm totally blanking on. Joshua Tree. Chris, where is my next show? Huh? Mike is.
It's Summer Arts Tired.
Yeah, it's totally Summer Arts Tired. I only have a little bit of information on that upcoming show. They still have to contact me, but I will be in a show that I'll be including some work from the Americana series in September. And I'm sorry, but I totally have Summer Arts head, so I'm like, what is that? We also have an upcoming show that Chris and I are curating at Claremont Graduate University called Biomtyhography Currency Exchange, which I do know the dates and time and where that's going to be. And that's going to be August 30th through September 16th.
Claremont College is in Claremont?
Mm-hmm. Claremont, California. Cool.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I was younger, I did a lot of pixel art, like specifically like the arrangement of pixels into like different compositions to create like specific things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really excited for like the pixel work you showed, but I wonder why did you just use like raw pixelization of things as opposed to like creating something out of it?
I don't even understand what you're asking.
Oh.
But I don't know what pixel, because I don't know what you're talking about using a level of technology where I don't know. And that's a certain level of play that I'm having with the work, because when I came to it, I had no idea how to use Photoshop. I'm not coming from like a hardcore photography background. I'm actually coming from a painting background. So some of the things that you're asking me are actually more technical types with a certain type of skill set that quite frankly, I don't have. So I'm coming to technical using the computer with the mentality of a painter. So that's why I'm limited. If that makes sense. So pretty much I think that's why I didn't do what you were asking me to, what it was you're asking me to do.
I'm sorry, I found your answer kind of interesting because you said you went into it with the mentality of a painter.
Mm-hmm.
But more, what I was asking was why didn't you paint with the pixels? Why did you feel compelled to just use the pixels as pixels?
I still don't, I don't,
I'm sorry.
because it's like,
made
how
more
would you
sense
paint
than
with
that.
pixels? Do you mean like paint pixels by hand? Or, I don't understand what paint with, like, how is that mediated? Or is that something that you physically do, or is that something that is used through technology? Is that how you paint a pixel? Is that like, that's where I'm trying to understand where you're coming from, in that sense. If that makes sense?
Yeah, I can understand what you mean. I'm sorry, my bad. I enjoyed that. I can never do that.
on ultra smooth matte paper. Mhm. And then what was it? What did I use as a medium on top of it? Or?
I know you worked it with graphite, so
Mhm.
I was wondering how it would take that.
Yeah, actually, so ultra smooth matte medium paper works beautifully with pastels and dense pigments that can be absorbed by the paper. It's very great for that. Nice smooth surface.
Okay. Your work seems very complex. When do you know that you're on the right track with certain elements, or do you have the overall picture in your mind and then you display it on art, or is this a generative work in progress?
Well, because like part of the process in making the work is collecting a series of images, creating a series of images, looking at different things that interest me, and creating some languages within the work in which certain things repeat. So there's kind of a common thread that travels throughout the work, and then playing with different surfaces and how it can be printed. So if you see like I work in a serial manner, and part of that is so kind of like what Martha was saying, it's like you work in a series to work out the different issues and potentials that could happen working in different ways.
And another, when you have that culmination of all those elements that you gathered, how do you know which combination works best? When do you have that, like, aha, that's the actual, that's how I want to place everything?
Well, I think just like with any artist, you are super, super observant about how the work is functioning, whether it be from formal aspects, and how conceptually it's working with the formal aspects within the work. Usually, like the first time working in this way, because when the gentleman was asking me about the pixels, my way of working with, I came to Photoshop seriously not knowing how to use Photoshop. And so when I was playing with it as a medium, that I needed to be free enough to see how it would work, and use my skills as an artist who's used to working with painting and drawing. So thinking about scale, color, form, composition, all of these things functioning, and getting it to a point where I could figure out how to do that in a way that was meaningful in Photoshop, which helped me to come to a space where, this interesting thing is happening, cool.
I had a question
Oh, okay.
right here. I'm just sitting here really awed at the complexity and intelligence and beauty that you have created, and I'm also just really aware of that, like as an outsider, if I had just seen one of your pieces, how much I would not have understood what was happening. And so I guess my question is just like, when you are displaying pieces at a gallery, how much do you feel like you want to let like a casual viewer know, or do you feel like you need to explain things more?
I think I trust in people's ability, especially considering how much media and information that we consume and have access to on a daily basis, to do the damn work. I don't know how to mic things work.
Hi.
Hi.
You really led us, at the beginning of this presentation, you really led us into what your influence was and where those things come from. And I'm always very interested in where certain artists' influence comes from, because many artists don't let us into that aspect of their influence. They tend to want to hide the magic behind that. And I really enjoyed that. Do you find that you take the influence first and utilize it, or you see where the influence came from later, once the piece is done? And you're like, oh snap, that's from when I was like a child.
It goes back and forth.
Okay.
sometimes, especially again, because I'm experimenting with some of this stuff I wasn't even sure how it was gonna work. And as I move further and further along with the series, with the different series, I start seeing how things are operating and working. So I can be kind of critical and observe how I can see where things are coming from or where I start getting interested in, and I can make informed decisions on how I move forward.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I really appreciate how you're fearless in your art.
Oh, thank you.
And I was curious to know about the brown elephant in the room.
Mhm.
And when did you do that and what was the reaction? And also in regards to the panels about questioning of white women in the art world and their posturing. I was wondering what kind of commentary that elicited or debate or discussion or reactions.
Okay, so that was done in 2013, I believe. So it was before the huge discussion about, before like gallery tally and all these other things started like taking place. I made this statement, and I think what was interesting about it is the curator of the show was a gay white man. And so he was like, yeah, dude. And I was like, I know. And the white women were quiet. Last question.
I noticed that you used yourself, self-portraiture in a lot of your own images.
Mhm.
And I think for an artist that is usually a very conscious and brave choice. Where does that stem from for you personally? And yeah, why do you use yourself?
I don't feel that I've been included or I'm seen in art history, so damn it, I'm putting myself in.